Good morning. It was not an intended unconscious bias on John's part when he introduced our cellist as the flaming cellist. That's the first time I've actually ever noticed that. And now you will never not notice that. I was particularly afraid, I haven't done this a long time either, of having senior moments up here if I should, and they should exceed 2 hours. Please feel free to get up and go. I will take it personally. I take everything personally, intellectually, but my heart knows wiser. It was a little misleading what my talk was going to be about this morning. It's really about the most profound things that have ever happened to me, the most challenging, the most difficult, the darkest, and my utter gratitude for them. That at this point in my life, I can almost, if I should anticipate something dark ahead, I can actually look forward to it. Very recently, I was diagnosed with a cancer that is easily treatable. And for 1 second, I was bothered by the C word. And then I went right to, all right, what I used to say, oh, another effing opportunity, was different this time. I won't die, but I get to raise my consciousness about what I want to look at right now with mortality in mind. Win-win. It seems to always be that way with me. I had an incredibly abusive father. I'm extremely grateful for what that gave me as a teacher of 30 years, and that was a great appreciation for the fragility of children. Every member of the 6 members in my family had a debilitating disease. I am amazed my mother did not shoot herself. Wow. Did the special ed department or the disabilities department at my school ever loved me? I didn't realize that I came with such gifts as a result of that experience. Lots of trauma, lots of challenges. I am so grateful for them. I am a recovering alcoholic. The first of the 12 steps is about not drinking. The rest are what you come here for: spiritual, emotional, psychological growth. I am so grateful that I became addicted to alcohol, and that led me to actually numerous 12-step programs. I was up to about 48 when I said, that's enough of the 12-step program. My name is Peter Mathews, has been said, and I am very grateful and proud to be gay, even though it seemed like it was a very, very long struggle, as I'm sure you can all appreciate. And I appreciate, really, this morning, since I'm new to your church, to be able to have this opportunity to raise my consciousness once again to all that I've gained from experiencing my coming out and being a gay man. Since all people, I believe, have experienced both suffering and marginalization, by no means do I feel I've had some special or unique avenue into insight. But I am very grateful and very happy for the little that I may have acquired as a result of it. Growing up, and typically so, I was very confused and uncertain about both my gender and my sexual preference. It's funny, I got to a point where I thought, I can now say I am a man. And now I'm getting to the point where I don't even want to say that. But I guess you gotta go through a process. I recall at 8 years of age actually asking the universe or God and myself, I don't remember exactly, it was 8, to which gender do I belong? I appreciate now this catalyst for appreciation that has played a role in, I hope, considerable open-mindedness, and I'm grateful for that. And to question these things for so long taught me how to get somewhat comfortable with uncertainty and to ultimately appreciate the benefits that arise from the advantages of doubt. I am so glad I live with so much doubt. Is it uncomfortable? Is it frustrating? I hate it. But I am grateful. It keeps me growing. Certainty is an emotion. I remember once being certain I had put my keys somewhere to such an extent that when I found them, I really thought a burglar had come in the middle of the night and moved my keys. Certainty doesn't necessarily have anything to do with reality. The longer I could tolerate ambiguity, the closer to reality I get. And if I judge people and myself too quickly, I lose out on so much that reality can bring. I think there is a there. So far. There'll be more. I'd like to read a poem by Erica Zhang called You Are There. You are there. You have always been there. Even when you thought you were climbing, you had already arrived. Even when you were breathing hard, you were at rest. Even then, it was clear you were there. Not in our nature to know what is journey and what arrival. Even if we knew, we would not admit. Even if we lived, we would think we were just germinating. To live is to be uncertain. Certainty comes at the end. Decades ago, I was sitting in a classroom, and this was completely out of context of what the instructor was doing. A student just raised their hand and said, "Are gay people innately inclined to become artists, pastry chefs, decorators, spiritual leaders, nurses, etc., etc.?" "No, I don't think so," said the teacher. He went on to say, "Perhaps everyone has these inclinations. I believe that my having come out and also having worked to accept my gayness, which was hard, opened the door to a number of inclinations that I would have otherwise suppressed or would have otherwise been oblivious to. I am grateful for this." During this earlier struggle in my life, I became interested in pursuing a definition for identity and just how I would come to know my own. The old question that we all ask, who am I, what am I, why am I here? My being gay or having been a school teacher or a registered Democrat or my name being Peter, of course, has nothing, as you know, with our or my identity. In college, and long before I became aware of Unitarian Universalism, one of my favorite courses of study was the Romantic period of literature in the 19th century, the Transcendentalists, which were part of that period, their literature, thought, and art. This was the period, of course, of our saints, and they believed, as I understood it, that reality and the ideal, or perfection, are one and the same. They're synonymous. In the Christian faith that I was raised in, I often heard, "Thy kingdom come," or "the kingdom of heaven can be yours." Same thing. When I was a bit older and attending teachings of more Eastern thought, I heard a Buddhist instructor define nirvana. To my surprise, he answered, "Nirvana is reality." My reality is. Not everyone's is. I appreciate that. The 12-step programs teach people to tell on themselves. You are taught, or beaten up, to tell on yourself. Don't point this way. It's a waste of time. This begins with admitting faults, or what might appear to be faults, or as they put it, character defects. As this process evolves and you keep doing this, pointing this way, I began to discover that defects is not a sinful thing necessarily, but perhaps a perfectly human thing. And then as I continued to do this, I began to experience an overwhelming number of positive and beautiful attributes about myself, and I presume that you would too. These I began to see were my reality, and therefore my identity. The so-called defects became more easily accepted, excused, and as I have said, embraced. Richard Rohr reminds us that Christ is not Jesus' last name. You and I are the Christ. You and I are the Buddha. You and I are chocolate cake, my favorite dessert. I am almost completely certain. I originally said I am certain, but then I read a poem about never be certain, so I had to change that. I am almost completely certain that this is my identity, and it was being gay and hating myself for it that drove me in the direction to find my identity, that I can see in you, not 24/7, and I can see in me, not 24/7. Perhaps some of you have read William Faulkner's Light in August. In the beginning of the novel, there's a young boy in an orphanage, takes place about 100 years ago. I was going to say in the South, and I thought, no, I shouldn't say in the South. I'm just feeding another prejudice. Anyway, I said it. I look like Trump there. We at first witnessed Joe Christmas as this little boy in an orphanage. He is the main character of the whole novel. And there are two attendants in the room that are talking about one of the children. The reader never knows who the attendants were talking about, and the boy doesn't actually either as far as his seeing them. He's turning in an opposite direction. The attendants are discussing the fact that one of the children is 1/16 black. The young Joe Christmas assumes this is him, as a young child would naturally do. And this, of course, affects his life profoundly until he dies. Joe's physical features, however, are what most of us might call white. He was a white individual. He was technically a Caucasian. As an adult, Joe moves into the black community because he's so honest. I'm 1/16 black, which means I'm 100% black. Well, they reject him. You can't live here. You're a white man. So he moves into the white community. Guess what happens? Faulkner's point, of course, is none of it means anything. And I know it is our nature to put meaning on almost everything. I used to tell my students, there is no Big Dipper in the sky. Oh, yes, there is, Mr. Mathews. I said, no, there is no Big Dipper in the sky. If you never experienced that, you wouldn't see one. I often wonder how much meaning I put on things. In fact, as I wrote this, I became confused. I became vulnerable to my own culturally programmed and gene-carrying unconscious labels and biases. Joe Christmas, the boy in the story, becomes a violent killer, like we're seeing people become in America. What might appear to be an intense anger on his part probably was more an explosive combination of guilt, shame, self-loathing, and frustration. I think frustration and anger feel the same, but I don't think they are. I think we're more often frustrated than we are angry. I think this helps me a little bit to have a bit of empathy for some of the things that are happening in our country today. I also, from Faulkner, was reminded that the notion that reality is not what we think it is, but rather what or who we are. Projection, they call it. I wonder how many hours a day we're doing that. And Faulkner is known for reminding me that the past is the present. I do the best I can, when I'm mindful of it, to separate the two and try to live in reality. And the conclusions we sometimes draw, therefore, about one another, well, we might as well realize the lack of value and true to most of those. After having two girls and waiting over a decade for me, her first boy, My mother smothered me with cute clothing and abundance of hugs and kisses. Until Mrs. Pastore showed up. A few months after I was born, Mrs. Pastore, a neighbor of ours at the time, dropped in to take a peek at the newborn, to take a peek at me. Mrs. Pastore became quickly concerned that my mother's adoration of me could lead to a sinful reality, that I could become a homosexual. The adoration stopped. 17 years later, I choked a little on that one. I thought I was past. It's okay. 17 years later, my mother asked me permission to hug me. Something new for both of us at the time. What understanding did Faulkner and my mother bring me from this? That life can be so arbitrary. That nothing is ever personal, even though I'll take everything personally. Words can be incredibly powerful, and thoughts, which we always have to remind ourselves about, or I do anyway, are not facts necessarily, like the keys. 70 years later, my mother had grown tremendously, as Twain would say. She sat me down for a little chat in her late 80s, and she said, "You know, Peter, I always dreamed and prayed that you would become a priest." I actually heard that a lot. I left the church when I was 18. I actually wanted to be a priest, but I realized I didn't believe a thing they were saying, and I thought, this is going to be difficult. So I didn't do it. I shouldn't say a thing. I certainly learned some beautiful things. But. And if that couldn't happen, she went on to say, I hoped you would get married, she said under her breath to a girl, and raise a family. Then she continued, although you do not wear a white collar or even attend a Catholic church, which I know was much to her disappointment, she said, you have nonetheless indeed become a priest. Whitman said, someday we'll need no priests, for we will all become our own priests. And then she closed with saying, and now you have married and created a beautiful family as well. My mother was a bigot, and she adored me, and I adored and I adore her. She has passed on now. When I was 11 years old and my sister was 8, my parents escorted us into the TV room for an educational opportunity. We were required to watch the 1967 film, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy, as you probably recall, were a white, liberal, educated, and affluent couple who were expecting their daughter to visit with their new fiancé, the black Sidney Poitier. He was the surprise guest. The white couple struggled. And Poitier's father in the film is apprehensive about their marriage as well. Poitier says to his father, you see yourself, Dad, as a black man, while I see myself as just a man. Perhaps an updated script 100 years from now won't even use the word man. After the movie, our parents sat us down and they promised us most sincerely, most lovingly, that if we ever bring home someone of color, they will love them too. Wonderful. Pretty cool parents for the 60s. I won't mention even their political party, which now surprises me. They were so cool. Some years later, when I was in a committed relationship with a man, my parents forbid us from visiting their home. Great learning opportunities. Never cease. It reminds me of a teacher in the novel To Kill a Mockingbird who teaches her students about the evils of racism while she assumes a man is guilty of rape based solely on his color. I think she was the most important character in the novel. And here's the greatest thing I learned. This was my struggle with my mother. I've learned that unconscious or even conscious bias is irrelevant to love or even unconditional love. I know now my mother never stopped adoring me. I'm one of the fortunate ones. I also came to believe from Harper Lee and my mother that no one sins, no one I know anyway, sins in awareness. And that is why I don't use the word forgive. I use the word excuse. I excused my violent father. I excused my mother. There was nothing to forgive. Perhaps the greatest gift of all, having been arbitrarily assigned to the gay preference, is that all of it has motivated me to find all that was and continues to be necessary to defeat my self-loathing and annihilation, self-annihilation that I had for a while. I still carry some of that at my core. I may never entirely defeat the shame of childhood abuse, not mine, of course, or my homophobia, not mine, of course, but I can refrain, and I hope I do the vast majority of time, from identification with it and hold tight to my real, ideal, and perfect identity. I close with a short Rumi poem. Hold on to love and don't be afraid. Hold on to the truth and don't be afraid. Hold on to the real behind the false and don't be afraid. For the beloved you seek is none other than yourself. Hold on to this truth and don't be afraid. I am so grateful that I feel a little guilty. Back to the therapist, I guess. Namaste.